Let me begin by acknowledging the distinguished members of the NDB boards of governors and directors, the president of the New Development Bank, business leaders present here, civil society representatives, members of the media, senior management and staff of the bank, and of course, all distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to begin by wishing all of you a warm welcome to Cape Town, South Africa, on behalf, I believe, of our President, President Ramaphosa. As I welcome you to Cape Town in the midst of a very important conference, I wish to refer to an experience I had several years ago when I was host of a conference, an international conference in Cape Town. Very pleasant, relaxed program for after sessions had been developed. Unfortunately, my ministerial colleagues at the time did not understand that the leisure program was meant for after session and not during session, because of the attractiveness of Cape Town and this very location, which is very close to our wonderful beaches. So I do alert you that the leisure is for after session and not during session. Nevertheless, a warm welcome to our wonderful city, Cape Town. This month marks 6 years since our country hosted the 5th annual BRICS Summit in eThekwini. Not only did the summit complete the first full cycle of summits, but it was in eThekwini that the 5 nations announced their intention to establish an infrastructure-focused development bank. I regard the eThekwini Summit as a seminal moment for BRICS countries, as the occasion marked the first time the group recognized the importance of opening and strengthening their engagement with, in particular, non-BRICS member countries. Under the stewardship of South Africa as chair then, a retreat with BRICS and African leaders was held to discuss opportunities toward unlocking Africa's potential, as well as BRICS and Africa cooperation on infrastructure. It is against this backdrop that I welcome the New Development Bank's first annual meeting on African soil with a great deal of optimism. The expectation from this engagement is that there'll be greater understanding in all areas of mutual cooperation among development partners. I hope that the meetings you will hold here will positively inspire discussion on the role the New Development Bank and broader development partners can play in South Africa and Africa's greatest economic opportunity, and that is investing in infrastructure in order to provide a better life for all the people on our continent. Ladies and gentlemen, as you're well aware, our continent has experienced significant economic growth over the last 2 decades, and real growth rates have reached levels above 5% in the period 2000 to 2015. However, in recent years, our growth has lagged on the back of the commodity downswing and negative spillovers from the global economic crisis. Nonetheless, Africa remains the second fastest growing region in the world after developing Asia. Consequently, the continent is attracting increasing interest and investment from the international financial community. While, of course, we celebrate that Africa is finally rising to take an important place in the global economy, we recognize that more needs to be done to ensure that this translates into a direct and measurable impact on the quality of lives of all the citizens of the countries in our continent. Unfortunately, economic and development indicators across the continent remain worlds apart. For example, recent World Bank data shows that the number of people living in extreme poverty is on the rise in sub-Saharan Africa, containing more than half of the extreme poor in 2015. Forecasts also indicate that by 2030, nearly 9 in 10 extremely poor people will live in sub-Saharan Africa. With this in mind, therefore, we need to start thinking about what it will take for Africa to improve its odds of overcoming poverty much faster within the next decade. Continentally, regionally, and sub-regionally, policymakers need to identify synergies in investment, both capital and social. For most African countries, including South Africa, this will require policies and initiatives that foster inclusivity and sustainability, faster growth, as well as improvement in the distribution of the gains from growth. Achieving these goals will necessitate substantially higher and innovative opportunities and approaches to financing development. I'd like to briefly then turn to the subject of global partnerships and to also perhaps reflect on Africa's development priorities, then infrastructure financing in South Africa's renewed growth path. It is clear from our own analysis that globally we have a lot of work to do to establish secure and working partnerships. Achieving the Sustainable Development Goals represents tremendous investment opportunities. However, it requires an effective strategy for attracting development finance. We see that despite growing momentum for investments in sustainable development, the financing gap remains significant. A major challenge in financing the 2030 agenda will be attracting and directing collective efforts and partnerships to invest in areas that support the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Financing for sustainable development, guided by the SDGs, as well as the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, will require action by a diverse range of actors. Governments fostering enabling environments for financing and investment, and then development actors and the private sector working together to champion innovative solutions toward mobilizing resources for long-term investment. But then as a continent, we also have a lot of development work to do. The attractiveness of development finance lies in Africa's ability to explore non-traditional ways of financing projects, as well as mobilizing and pooling large financial resources in a less costly manner. One question remains for us, given all of this. What do we, as Africans, really need? Well, we need social and economic infrastructure. We need a healthy and skilled population. We need employment and economic growth. These are the needs that must guide development partners in order to demonstrate agility in responding to the region's evolving needs. Official assistance development to the continent has continued to fall due to the challenging economic conditions faced by traditional donor countries. To deal with the uncertain environment, we need innovative thinking to complement traditional financing methods. Importantly, we as a continent need to do more to enhance our domestic resource mobilization. It makes no sense for us to expect that donor countries will fund our initiatives on their own without us increasing our efforts to secure resources in our own domestic environment. So a great deal of domestic resource mobilization strategies need to be in place in order to complement the resources that we may secure from donor countries. This domestic environment requires updating and improving tax laws and other financial regulations. Should we act on these matters, these efforts will create an environment for increased fiscal space, for sovereign creditworthiness, and will also aid capital market development. Being overly reliant on financial aid from developed countries places the continent's development agenda at the mercy of business cycles, as we have recently seen. We need to also preserve the capital that is generated on the continent. Between 2000 and 2010, the African continent is reported to have lost approximately $510.9 billion through capital flight. Efforts toward identifying and indeed curbing illicit financial flows from Africa will greatly assist our efforts to mobilize domestic resources and will thus also empower the continent to play a more critical policy and governance role in its development agenda. So for us as South Africa, infrastructure projects and investment in infrastructure have been identified as critical areas of policy action. We think that there are few economic opportunities as exciting as those that exist in our wonderful country, South Africa. South Africa has achieved many things in its 25 years of democracy. But one of the most remarkable has been the way we have embraced a shared future and the way we have reversed a history of division. Our country and government have committed huge resources to infrastructure projects over the medium term. These projects are financed at national, provincial, and local government levels, in public entities, public investment in public-private partnerships, as well as investment by state-owned enterprises. We are, of course, mindful of the need to ensure the quality of infrastructure investment. We also require that investment decisions are backed by sound feasibility studies so that we can make absolutely rational investment decisions. The policy of our country is to use diverse sources of funding for meeting our identified infrastructure and service delivery needs in a manner that is cost-effective and appropriately adapted to the circumstances of each particular project. We are fully aware and have experienced in these first 25 years of democracy that development is difficult to achieve and takes time. However, as South Africa, we've set ourselves on a path of renewal and growth. We are a country determined to strengthen partnerships and collaboration domestically as well as internationally for inclusive economic growth and development. President Kama, our involvement in the new development bank is driven by our passion and desire to realize our vision of a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development. I am fully hopeful that you and the management you lead will seize the opportunity to help us think of new ways to make the bank respond to our development needs in an efficient and tangible manner. The role of our domestic development finance institutions, such as the Development Bank of Southern Africa, the Industrial Development Corporation, and the Land Bank in realizing these goals cannot be understated. These institutions continue to play a key role in our efforts to harness financial flows for long-term economic growth in South Africa, the Southern African region, and now increasingly across the continent. We will need to ensure that our policies foster linkages between multinational companies, the domestic private sector, as well as state-owned enterprises, specifically in facilitating the transfer of skills, knowledge, and best practices for our country's efforts as well as those of the region. In conclusion, as South Africa and the African region is poised to enter a period of social and economic transformation, I believe the new Development Bank and its development partners will be ready to support infrastructure imperatives at national and regional level to help overcome the legacy of the past and to enhance the quality of life of all our people. I would like then, with these remarks, to conclude my welcome to all of you once again and to wish you well in the meetings you're about to have. You will note that I didn't talk about my favorite subjects, which are the importance of developing critical skills in South Africa and Africa. And so I ask, as the bank deliberates on the various infrastructure and other initiatives you will refer to during your deliberations, do not neglect the importance of skills and education. Do not neglect the importance of science and innovation, because through these and through their strengthening on our continent, we will lay the basis for fundamental development and true sustainable development on the African continent. I therefore declare the 4th annual meeting of the new Development Bank officially open, and I thank you most sincerely for your attention. Thank you.